By the caption on this video, man, it's gonna probably be sick. Man Googles how to beat murder after killing ex-girlfriend and her daughter.
The truth finally comes out more than a year after a Washington mother and her 7-year-old daughter are brutally murdered. Now, her ex-boyfriend admits he's the one who pulled the trigger.
Bruh.
Confessing he even Googled how to beat murder to cover his tracks. This is the story of 27-year-old Miche Melendez and her 7-year-old daughter, Layla Stewart. The pair lived in Vancouver, Washington, and disappeared sometime last spring. Their family later told investigators the last day they for sure saw Miche and Layla was on March 11th, 2023. Days later, on March 18th, 2023, police were finally called to their apartment for a welfare check. Neighbors said they hadn't seen Miche or 11th over Washington Melendez and her 7-year-old daughter, Layla Stewart. The pair lived in Vancouver, Washington, and disappeared sometime last spring. Their family later told investigators the last day they for sure saw Miche and Layla was on March 11th, 2023. Days later, on March 18th, 2023, police were finally called to their apartment for a welfare check. Neighbors said they hadn't seen Miche or Layla for days, but they had heard a dog barking from inside their apartment. After entering, first responders did find the dog, but there was no sign of Layla or Miche. The next day, Miche's mom found her vehicle, a 2000 Chrysler 200, but there was still no sign of Miche or Layla. Police seized the vehicle and began searching for evidence, finding blood in both the front and back seats of the car. They also found a purse with Miche's ID inside of it, clothes matching the ones Layla was last seen wearing, and some .22 caliber shell casings. After that, the investigation zeroed in on one main suspect, now 28-year-old Kirkland Warren. Warren and Miche had a past relationship.
Like a buster, man. I'm not even gonna lie. Like a straight lame. Dude looked like a cornball. Dude looked like he don't even how did he even pull that? Bro, how did he even pull that? Look at his face.
But weren't dating at the time of her disappearance. Police took Warren into custody and booked him for tampering with a witness, assault, unlawful possession of a firearm, and violating a court order. At the time of his arrest, Warren already had a lengthy criminal record, including a murder charge out of Arkansas. More on that later, but he also had a previous domestic violence charge involving Miche. In December 2022, Warren was arrested after firing a gun into Miche's apartment. He was taken into custody and released only 4 days before Miche and her daughter disappeared. Days after Warren's arrest, on March 22nd, 2023, police got a tip that led them to a heavily wooded area on the Washington-Oregon border. A person walking their dog had come across what they called 2 life-size mannequins. Once on the scene, first responders quickly determined they weren't mannequins, but rather the bodies of Miche and Layla. They'd both been shot in the head, and there were signs that Layla had been sexually assaulted. She was naked from the waist down, and semen was found at the...
Hold on. Please don't tell me that that's the little girl's name. He did that to the little girl, bro.
Scene. The DNA later proved to match Warren. That led to Warren's charge of first-degree aggravated murder, second-degree murder, and first-degree child molestation. He originally...
Child molestation. He... Ooh.
pleaded not guilty to the charges, but the evidence against him soon piled up. Someone only referred to as an acquaintance of Miche told police that she and Layla stayed at their home on March 11th. At one point, the acquaintance was watching over Layla as Miche went out with Warren. They came back at about 8 a.m., and the acquaintance reported Miche was in the past... passenger seat of the car. It looked like she'd been passed out. The acquaintance told police that Warren collected Layla, put her in the car, and then drove off. In the days following this, Warren made some questionable moves, texting a friend asking her about a secluded place nearby and ideas of where he could bury a gun. According to his search history, Warren also Googled, quote, how to get blood out of a car seat, How to Beat Murder, and Killing the Only Witness. He also used Miché's phone to transfer $4,200 to his bank account. Warren was set to go to trial this month, but
should have got hit with robbery too.
Took a plea deal on September 5th. He pleaded guilty to the first and second degree murder charges, but took something called an Alford plea in the charge of sexual assault.
Of course he
did. An
did.
Alford plea basically says the prosecution has enough evidence to prove the defendant committed the crime beyond a reasonable doubt, but the defendant still maintains their innocence.
Right.
With all that in mind, there's a lot to unpack in this case, and that leads to our guest, former prosecutor Melba Pearson. What are your initial feelings when you're going through and reading the details of your case? As a former prosecutor, what's kind of going through your mind?
Sheer and absolute disgust, and this is someone who needs to be under the prison, not just in the prison.
Under, like she
but
said,
under it. To violate his partner that way, his girlfriend, to violate a child in that manner is just beyond the beyond. And then to dispose of them like they're garbage, it was just clearly this is someone with deep-seated hate towards.
What happened was she broke up with him. Probably started messing around with somebody else. He got salty and waited for his chance of opportunity. And when he got it, he killed her. He probably was watching him for days. You know, and then followed her somewhere and called her. I wonder how this, bro? What was going through this nigga's mind, man?
Women and girls and children, and someone who has a lot of rage issues and maybe was in the beginning stages of being a serial killer. Since
he ain't got no rage issues, he just got something against women and females. Look at him though. He probably got bullied when he was a little kid. Don't get me wrong, I got bullied when I was a kid, but it wasn't by no females. It was by dudes, which means I had to fight a lot, which means eventually by the time I hit 11, 12, I wasn't getting bullied no more. You feel me? This dude looked like he got bullied from elementary all the way up to high school. Got bullied by females and dudes and took it out on this little family right here.
He had already had another homicide that he was connected to. So definitely someone who's deeply sick and disturbed, without a question.
We know Warren was charged in Miché and Layla's murders, but prior to that, he also had another murder charge out of Arkansas. That case dates back to 2017, when the body of Curtis Urquhart was found in a ditch in a rural area. He'd been shot in the head. Warren was also charged in that crime. So how was he ever released?
So I would guess, again, not knowing the full facts of that entire case, usually when you see someone out on bond for a charge that's as severe as second or first degree murder, that probably speaks to the weakness of the prosecution's case.
That little girl's life,
because usually those are types of charges that are non-bondable, meaning you can't get bail or bond or anything. You have to sit in custody until your trial. Now, often you may see, like with extremely wealthy people, that they may end up in a situation where they're able to be on house arrest.
Bro, what is going on with people killing women and kids? What happened? What happened to that? What happened with that? Like, I could have sworn that there was like some type of code that even the mafia respected. Like, they did not kill women or children.
But again, it's a matter of the determination has to be made by the judge whether or not this person is a danger to society, whether or not they're a flight risk, whether or not they're going to return to court for their trial. So clearly the judge looked at the facts, may have felt that the prosecution didn't have a strong enough case, and that possibly this person was not going to flee and not going to harm anyone else. Unfortunately, that judge was proven deadly wrong, because the defendant then left Arkansas, went to Washington, and killed two more people.
And if we're talking about the moves he made in Washington, before he killed this woman and her young daughter, he actually was already arrested for firing a gunshot into her apartment. He'd been taken into custody, and then he'd been ordered not to see her when he was released, and was released only 4 days before she disappeared. This is what's tough to me, because obviously he was court ordered to no longer see her. He had put her in a dangerous situation in the past by shooting a gun into her apartment. But then he sees her again. I don't know, it gets tricky there. What do you think?
Yeah, so first off, I'm kind of at point A as to how he was released in Washington State for firing the gun through her apartment. Because, that's usually the discharge of a firearm. That could be, depending on the state, an aggravated assault with a firearm, again, depending on the facts. But usually, if you have a pending case in another jurisdiction, you don't get bond in the case, in the case of your new arrest. That's usually the procedure, because again, the question is, are you a danger to the community? And if you have potentially committed a crime in another jurisdiction, you're out on bond for that. Usually your bonds would get revoked. You'd be sent back to Arkansas to stand trial. And in the meantime, you're being held in Washington State for whatever it is you were charged with there. So again, unless there's some different procedure in Washington State that I'm not aware of, something there, something fell through the cracks there. Because maybe they didn't do a national background check to note that he had other cases, another case pending. But again, that's kind of standard procedure. So I'm still very confused on how he was able to get out in Washington State at all. But seeing that he did, my next question is, how much warning was provided to the victim and her child to let her know that this man was about to be released? Because what we all know is that when a restraining order is put in place, or when a restraining order is served on an abuser, that's often the most dangerous time for a domestic violence victim or survivor, because now that's something that angers the defendant, and then they seek to either A, get retribution, or B, try to make contact to sweet talk you into dropping the...
Man, let me tell you, I had a domestic violence charge against me, but it's a whole story on that. I didn't even touch the girl, but we was arguing. And she said she feared for her life, but within, I can't remember, I want to say it was either 3 or 4 days of me being locked up or 3 or 4 days of me about to get out, she scheduled a visit. If you was scared of me, why would you schedule a visit? You know what I'm saying? Actually, it was when I got locked up, because they said I could use that in my defense. But I was just ready to get out. I know how the system play over here in Kentucky, and I was just ready to go. I already got a record of felony, so I was thinking in my mind, this is a misdemeanor. I'm signing these papers and I'm getting out today, right? It was like, yeah, all right. So I did it, plead guilty, because when I read it, I did. I didn't hit her, but it wasn't domestic violence, even verbally, which is crazy. So yeah, be careful arguing. Shit can get hectic.
Restraining order or any other charges that are surrounding, the case. So was she notified?
But I wouldn't have never, ever, 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 ever got out and tried to find that bitch. I was done with her. You call the cops on me, I'm done with you. I don't want no smoke. No smoke, I'm done. We won't talk ever again.
Did she know to be able to maybe leave town, make herself safe, not go out with him, whatever the case may be?
Would you be interested in collecting 5-figure paychecks for a few hours of work, helping me in your spare?
I don't know. And then, of course, we still have the question of how he even ended up going out with her. Was she, lured? Was she threatened? So there's still a lot of things we don't know. But again, I have a lot of questions, and I'm seeing the potential of many things have fallen through the cracks, which resulted in the tragedy that we see today.
Going off what you're talking about with several things falling through the cracks, we don't know exactly what went on in Arkansas or the communication between there and Washington State, but obviously some steps were skipped or conversations weren't had that should have been. And it always gets me thinking, had procedure been completely followed, could this have been prevented?
I think it could have been. Granted, hindsight is always 2020, and we're operating based on what's publicly available, not what's actually in the case file for both of these states. But I feel like if proper procedure had been followed in terms of notifying the survivor, assuming she wasn't notified, again, we don't know, but at the very least, holding the defendant without bond in Washington State would have assured her safety. Mm-hmm. That's no question. Mm-hmm. Because if he was in custody, he would not have been out to kill them. I'm definitely seeing somewhere that there was a failure. It could have been a matter of maybe the staff that was in charge of looking up these different aspects were overwhelmed. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe, it could have been something very basic that when you searched one particular database, the case in Arkansas didn't pop up. I want to give the benefit of the doubt that maybe there was nothing, just to put it plainly, like it was something simple and was an oversight, not somebody was negligent in their job. That's what I'm hopeful for. But moving forward, I'm very hopeful that the Washington State and Arkansas State officials that are part of this, criminal justice system, that are stakeholders in the criminal justice system, would review this case and figure out what went wrong and make sure that policies and procedures are put in place so that this doesn't happen to anyone else again.
This one is really tricky to talk about because now we have to move into what actually happened. So we know the mother and daughter ended up going missing. There was a welfare check. Investigators go to their apartment, can't find the mom and daughter, but they do quickly connect the defendant to the case. And here's what I wanted to ask you about. Incriminating Google searches. This is kind of something we talk about a lot on Law and Crime because it seems like defendants, I don't know if they don't know that investigators are going to go through their search history or their texts or things like that. But in this case, he searched things like how to beat murder, how to get blood out of a car seat. To me, those are red flags immediately. Not going to look great for him. What do you think?
Oh, that's almost akin to a confession, because basically you're saying how to get away with murder. Like, if you're not trying to see what channel the show is playing on, clearly you have done something that you're trying to cover up.
What she means is how to get away with murder. It's a TV show, too. It's a whole TV show on Netflix that they got basically explaining how to get away with murder.
That's the reality there. In terms of getting blood,
but it's not really they explain it. It's a teacher. She's teaching a class on how to get away with murder.
Out of a seat. Listen, if it was just that alone, okay, maybe there's an argument to be made. You cut your hand, you got blood on the seat. You want to get it out of your upholstery. What stain fighting techniques work? Okay, but when you pair that with how to get away with murder, when you pair that with the fact that he was in a domestic violence relationship and had already been charged with trying to kill, basically, his partner, and then now you have a situation where both his partner and her daughter are missing, this is basically a confession. There's no way he's going to be able to get around that.
That leads into the charges against Warren. As a prosecutor, I'm wondering why you think they decided to charge first-degree aggravated and then second-degree and not just 2 first-degree aggravated.
So I think probably the second-degree aggravated may be tied to the girlfriend or the partner because he may not have necessarily premeditated her murder. I mean, I think he probably did, but again, you have to go based on the evidence that you have available. And was this a situation where he was like, hey, I just want to talk, I just want to reconcile, whatever the case may be, things get out of hand, and then he ends up killing her? I could see that scenario being, a very common one to play out. Now, the first degree aggravated murder to me is more likely for the little girl. And the aggravation is the fact that he sexually assaulted her. Mm-hmm. So, and then killing her afterwards. Mm-hmm. And that is clear from the evidence that was, recovered from the poor child on the scene, and then the DNA testing that was done later on. So that would be the first degree aggravated because of the fact that it's a child, because of the fact.
And just because you a killer, that don't mean you tough. Just remember, he killed people using a gun.
That the child was violated in the worst way possible, and in all likelihood, she was killed to cover up not only the sexual assault.
He killed one man and two women. Well, one woman and one little girl with guns. He ain't tough.
But the murder of her mother.
And initially, we know he pleaded not guilty, and then kind of in the 11th hour, right before he's set to head to trial, changes and pleads guilty. Are you surprised by this change in plea and kind of negating the trial and just saying, hey, I did it, and now moving on to sentencing?
Oh, I'm not surprised at all. I'm not surprised at all. This happens quite frequently, especially as I can't even count the number of trials I had where literally the jury was filing down to come into the courtroom and the defendant takes a plea. Because, it's getting real, right? This is that moment where now you're going to be judged by a jury of your peers, and the prosecution is going to bring forth whatever evidence they have against you. This is it. This is showtime. Right. And if you realize that, listen, the prosecution has a ton.
The truth is, behind closed doors, the P word became Mike Christen at age 10.
Ton of evidence against me. I don't have the greatest defense. Your defense attorney may be advising you, like, listen, I'm going to do my best, but you really should take this plea because, let's say, if the other option, I don't believe Washington State has the death penalty, but you're facing, life in prison without the possibility of parole, for instance, and they're offering you life with parole or whatever the case may be, that might be a better outcome versus going through the trial. The other aspect is if he really wants to hide his involvement to the best of his ability in raping this young child, he obviously would not want all the facts to come out at trial where his family may be sitting and listening, friends may be sitting in the courtroom and listening, obviously the victim's family will be sitting and listening. So now he can no longer hide the details of the horrors that he perpetuated on poor little Layla. So that may be another reason why he didn't want to go to trial.
It's also interesting to me because eventually we know our defendant pleads guilty to the murder charges, but then he takes something called an Alford plea in terms of the sexual assault against the 7-year-old Layla, the daughter in this case. I'm wondering what all of that means. Why would he plead guilty, straight up say, yes, I committed the murders, but is taking this Alford plea in terms of the sexual assault?
I think it's basically because he doesn't want to admit that he raped a child. That's a pretty heavy thing to carry with you, especially moving through life, and especially going into prison where, listen, there's a hierarchy. And at the very bottom of that hierarchy are child rapists and police officers. That's just the reality, and this is not me condoning or whatever the case may be. This is the reality in prison. Know what's going Those are the two rungs of inmates that generally have to be kept in segregated population. They cannot be generally in general.
When she say police, she mean rats, snitches, cops, ex-cops, shit like that.
Population, because usually other inmates will attack them, bully them, target them, because most of them have kids. Most of them, think that that's really disgusting. So he probably was trying to kind of mitigate his involvement and not come out and fully admit that, hey, he did this horrible, heinous thing. He could also be trying to preserve his image to his family as well. Not that they may necessarily still want to have contact with him or anything like that. But at the very least, he's trying to be like, well, yeah, listen, I'm a murderer, but I'm not a child rapist. Not that one's really better than the other because they're both pretty gross, but that may be the psychology that he had going into wanting to take an Alford plea and basically say the state had enough evidence to prove this charge against me, but I am not admitting guilt. It's just in my best interest to take a plea, is basically what the Alford plea means in this instance.
As part of the plea, Warren will receive a mandatory life in prison without parole sentence. That's set to be handed down at a hearing on October 8th. Warren has also agreed to plead guilty to the murder charge out of Arkansas and both sentences will run concurrently. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.
What? Concurrent. Okay, that's good. That's good, then. That's good. All right, so if y'all don't know, concurrent is he's gonna serve. they're, they're not charging together. They're gonna be separate. It's gonna be separate. So the time that he did in Arkansas is gonna be separate from the time that he did for killing her. And he's already got life without parole for killing them. Consecutive is when this ran together, and they basically charging him for killing everybody all in one. It's gonna be just one charge for that, but they smacked him. He's fucked, literally and figuratively. He's